Hello and welcome to Carmichael Clan Radio, the official podcast of Clan Carmichael USA. Welcome back to episode 16 of Carmichael Clan Radio. I'm your host, Scott Carmichael. On today's show, I'm joined by photographer and keynote speaker Jon Carmichael. As you'll hear on the show, Jon's path into photography came about almost by chance in a bookstore, and he learned and perfected the craft with no formal training. In fact, for years, Jon had never even printed a single photo, but through a series of serendipitous events found himself in the home of Sir Elton John, seeing his printed photos for the first time ever. Jon is best known for his large cosmic photographic mosaics, but received international acclaim after releasing his photo titled 108 of the 2017 Great American Eclipse, which he took from a Southwest Airlines commercial flight he had carefully chosen because of its optimal flight path. 108 played an unplanned part in Jon's path into keynote speaking, as he found himself delivering his first speech to over 5,000 Twitter employees after the last-minute cancellation of Elon Musk. Jon has since given speeches at TEDx and NASA, where he speaks on the power of curiosity, passion, and perseverance. Jon has worked with Southwest Airlines, Twitter, Dell Computers, ESPN, and with President Obama, the Dalai Lama, and many others along the way. This interview was an unreal adventure from start to finish, and I hope you enjoy listening as much as I did recording it. Jon's inspiring story truly reveals to us what's possible when you're unafraid to act on opportunities that present themselves before us throughout our lives. To learn more about Jon or to purchase copies of his amazing photographs, visit joncarmichael.com or find Jon on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the links below. As always, a few things before we begin. As you all know, the International Carmichael Gathering is taking place in Scotland in just over a month. This will be the first gathering since 2017 and is also the 40th anniversary of the first International Carmichael Gathering organized by Chief Richard. To signify this historic event, Clan Carmichael USA and Clan Carmichael International have teamed up with Katie Carmichael to create a limited edition commemorative print that will be available for purchase. Keep an eye out for more information to be released about this very special project. Clan Carmichael USA will be at Grandfather Mountain Highland Games in Linville, North Carolina on June 6th through June 9th. It's been a few years since Clan Carmichael has had a presence at these games, but we'll be there this year, so make plans to attend and to spend some time in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member of Clan Carmichael USA, visit the Clan Carmichael USA website at the link below or visit www.clancarmichaelusa.com. If you've not yet become a member, we hope you'll consider joining and becoming part of one of the best clans today. And now, let's get on to the show. Jon Carmichael, welcome to Carmichael Clan Radio. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I'm sure it came as a surprise that there was a random podcast reaching out to you that had your namesake, but I really do appreciate you, making the time for us and talking to me. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, it's so cool to meet another Carmichael, and I appreciate you inviting me to be on this because it's just an honor to,
yeah, absolutely,
be invited. So,
well, so there's a story here. I want to tell you how I discovered you, and this seems really random, and I almost couldn't believe it happened. So one night I was about to go to bed, and I was, like most humans do, I think now, I was checking my social media accounts before I went to bed, and I was scrolling through Facebook, and I saw a photograph that was this really unbelievable picture that looked like it was taken from outer space of the moon, or it was of the sun with the moon covering of the solar eclipse. And I thought, man, this is an amazing picture. And I thought I wanted to learn more about it. So I was reading, and it was it said this photograph was titled 108, and it was by Jon Carmichael. And I was like, what? Like, I thought that someone had reposted it on Clan Carmichael, the Facebook page or something, and it was like
Just
it was
a
just it had
coincidence.
showed up, yeah, somehow. And I thought,
Oh, that's
man,
awesome.
yeah, and I thought, well, I need to find out who this is, and so I reached out, and here we are.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was so random, but it was really neat. So you specialize in astrophotography, but you're also a keynote speaker. You've spoken to TEDx, NASA, Twitter on topics, and this was from your website, but on topics such as curiosity, passion, perseverance, and personal leadership. You've also worked with a number of notable people, such as President Obama, the Dalai Lama, Elton John, Lady Gaga, just to mention a few. So it's a real resume. I really was trying to figure out the best way to describe what it is you do, and you do a lot. You're a photographer, a keynote speaker, and so a really neat background.
Thanks.
But before we get to that photograph I was telling you about, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell me about yourself. How did you get started in photography? Just tell all the Clan Carmichael members a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. Well, that was quite an intro, so everybody's expectations are really high. But no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I grew up. Well, I was born in Minnesota. That's where most of my siblings are. My dad was there most of his life, as well as my mom. And when I was 6 months old, though, we moved to Vegas. So I grew up in Las Vegas, which I know sounds a little odd, but it's actually it's a pretty boring town. Not boring in a bad way. Like it just the opposite of what most people think when they hear Vegas. They think of all the hotels and the shows and the gambling and the bars and the partying, but the strip is just one road. Outside of the strip, it's a normal town with 2 million people. We've got churches and houses and schools and movie theaters like everybody else. So,
It's a real change from
um,
from Minnesota to the middle of the desert too.
yeah, well, an interesting story. I found out, my dad passed away about, well, exactly 10 years ago, last month, but found out after his passing that the reason we moved here, we were supposed to move to San Diego.
Okay.
And on their way, my parents, with their 6 month old and their 5 year old, my sister, on the way to San Diego, they decided to stop in Vegas and have some fun for a few days. And my dad worked in advertising. He was really well known in advertising. And, he had a job lined up in San Diego to be a creative director for this agency. And my mom and dad were at a booth in a restaurant talking about this new job. And this random stranger in the booth next to them overhears their conversation and says, "Can't help but butt in here, but I just opened up an ad agency here in Vegas, and Vegas is booming, and it's a huge opportunity." Somehow convinced my dad to turn down the job in San Diego to work for him in Vegas. And I never knew this my whole life. And I'm like, I turned to my mom, because the guy was telling the story at my dad's funeral, and I'm like, wait, I was supposed to grow up in San Diego? Are you kidding? But I do love Vegas though. But anyway, I digress. I'm getting distracted here. But
I lived in San Diego once too, and I can understand your disappointment because it's such a nice city.
It is. It is. I've been spending a lot of time there recently because I'm getting a camper van built that's going to be sort of my photography studio on wheels that I'm going to be living in, and it's going to be done in 10 days apparently. So very exciting. It's been getting built for 7 months, but anyway, the way I got started in photography, I actually never planned on being a photographer. It was not. I never even gave it a thought. I never even touched a camera until I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going through a pretty rough time in my life, and I ran away from Vegas and started a new life in LA. And I always felt like I wanted to get involved in TV and film in some way. I always really liked storytelling. And I just didn't really know what that was, but I knew LA is probably the place to be for storytelling. And LA was very close to Vegas, it was easy to go to. And so I kind of started a new life there. And it was about a year after I was living in LA. I was at a bookstore. I think it was a Borders when I don't think those exist anymore,
back when
but
books, yeah.
I was there with my roommate, and I was kind of just waiting for her to get out of the bathroom, and I turn around, I'm in front of the photography section of the bookstore, and this photograph on the cover of this book just really captivated me. And I always had now that I look back, I always had this fascination with photography, but I just never put two and two together and thought, oh, maybe I should pick up a camera. But this book really captivated me. And I opened up the book, and I happened to turn to the page that was actually talking about the photo on the cover of the book and how the photo was taken. And it was basically a photography tutorial or educational book. So, I was flipping through the pages, and I was reading about shutter speed and aperture, ISO, all these things I never heard of. And so I told my roommate I'll meet her at home, and I just sat in the bookstore all day that day, and I bought well over $100 worth of books, all on photography that day. I was pretty broke back then too. That was a lot for me to invest in. And I started taking the bus to work every day instead of driving, so I had more time, and I just dove into these books, and I read all four. I think I had about 4 books. I read all of them within a few months, and still having never touched a camera though. And I have never met a photographer still to this day that has learned in that way. So maybe I think it's a good way to learn. A lot of people buy a nice camera and they expect the photos are going to be great because this camera is $5,000.
Right.
And then they're like, something's wrong with my camera because these photos aren't that good, but they don't really know how the nuances, the
right.
little nuances are so important. So anyway, I finally bought my first camera. I had to finance it. I was really struggling financially, so buying this first camera was a big deal for me. And I just hit the ground running, and I was running around the streets of LA, photographing anything and everything, and photographing strangers, asking if I could take their photos. And it really became a remedy to my depression. I was going through a really rough time. I was, really depressed at the time. So photography was just, it was everything for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't thinking I want to do this professionally. It was just purely a hobby. And then after about 6 months, some of my friends I started meeting were actors and, people in that sort of industry in LA. And they said, oh, would you mind taking my headshots, and what would you charge? And I was like, oh, I can't charge anything. I'll just do it for free. And there was my friend Danny. I took his headshots. Or was it Danny? I can't remember. Somebody, and their agent called me and said, oh, did you take so-and-so's headshots? And I said, yeah. And I'm curious, how much do you charge? It's like, I don't know, $50. He's like, $50, I'll send you the whole city. And so I started slowly getting paid to take photos, doing headshots and stuff.
Yeah.
And then eventually I was doing weddings and, just kind of, I didn't know what part of photography I was really interested in. And they're all so different. There's so many genres,
mm-hmm.
And every genre you can spend a lifetime learning and improving. So, and then I started shooting events somehow. And then that led into, I started photographing for Dell computers and Twitter. I was Twitter's photographer for about 7 years. And so it just sort of turned into, I was just kind of going with the flow,
Yeah.
and I was very lucky in the people I was meeting and sort of networking. I think the secret to networking is not trying to network and just being an authentic human being, and just getting to know people for who they are. And so that led to, a lot of people, a lot of my clients, as their careers started going up, they would recommend me for their new companies that they started working for. And, so it was just kind of word of mouth. And then the Obama campaign, that was a really, really exciting experience. And that was through my friend Justin. And, it's just one of those things that things just started unfolding. However, during this time, that was what I was doing professionally for about 10 years was, this event photography. But a few years after I started shooting, I discovered something called astrophotography, which is photographing the night sky, the astronomy photography, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And and I've always been a space fan since I was a little kid. I mean, I've always loved flying, rockets, space, everything. And when I realized I can merge my passion for photography with astronomy,
Mm-hmm.
that was it for me. So, but I never thought you can get paid doing astrophotography. So I was just doing that as a hobby, and it took many, many years just to get even decent at it, because it's very, very complicated. It's very technologically expensive, and also just, it's complex, and you have to, depending on what you're shooting, of course. But I really like shooting the Milky Way and blending it with landscape. And so, but to photograph the Milky Way galaxy, the Earth is rotating. So the stars in the night sky move, right?
Right.
Or we're moving, but it looks like they're moving. So you actually have to take really, really long exposures to get the detail out of the night sky. But even if you're shooting just for 1 minute, which most of my exposures are 6 to 8 minutes, the stars just turn out like streaks in the camera, because it's just sitting on a tripod. So you have to counteract the Earth rotation using something called an equatorial mount. And then depending if you're going to do like deep space stuff, then you have to, take thousands of shots throughout the night and layer them all together. And it's very, very tedious. You really have to have a passion for it to stick with it, So that was my hobby for a long time, just on the side. I never showed anybody any of those photos. I guess I wasn't viewing it as artwork. Now that I think back, like, why didn't I show anybody, these photos?
Yeah.
It was when my dad passed away, actually, that I had this big wake up call, because my dad had a lot of hobbies. He was a board game designer, actually, he did that professionally. He published a bunch of board games in the 60s and 70s, but he was a painter and a poet. He wrote 6 novels, and
wow,
just really, really creative. I really looked up to him, and he was always sharing with me his newest paintings, and things like that. And so when he passed away, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to share my artwork with my dad. And I thought, why have I always just kept these photos to myself, And so that's what motivated me to, I literally had never even printed a single photo in 10 years.
Huh.
I knew nothing about printing. That was a whole nother industry. I knew nothing about that. I took about a year off of working, essentially, to solely focus on learning the printing process. And I thought, okay, I want to take the top 10 photos from the last decade and print them up as large as I possibly could. I wanted to learn what the highest quality print is. And I learned something called chromogenic printing. I don't know if any of this is interesting.
No, I think it all is.
I kind of geek out and I get on a tangent. So, but I learned about this printing that prints with laser instead of ink.
Okay.
And it burns, that you can actually burn onto crystal. It's like a microscopic crystal. It's not even a paper. And so it's the most saturated, most reflective, sharpest photographs that you can print. And when I learned about that, and there's only this particular printer, there's only about 12 of them left in the United States, because they're so expensive. They're like $1 million printer, and they're really expensive to maintain. So I found one out of state, and I'd go back and forth and got all these proofs made. And my goal was to get them all done in time for my dad's birthday. It was sort of his birthday gift, from me, post-mortem, so it was very expensive, these prints, like crazy, crazy expensive. So I used to fly hang gliders. I had like this powered hang glider aircraft. And actually behind me here, I switched to something called powered paragliding.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like you have basically a propeller on your back.
I've seen those.
So
yeah.
that's what
it's a giant fan.
I just recently learned how to fly those. Anyway, I've always loved flying, but I had this really cool hang glider, but it was picture like a go-kart with a hang glider above it, like in Mario Kart. Literally, that's kind of what I had. And you have a throttle on your foot, just like a car,
Huh.
and you go full throttle and take off. And I had this aircraft for 8 years, and I couldn't afford these prints though. I wanted them as large and expensive as possible. I wanted to, after 10 years never producing a print, I wanted my first prints to be extra special. I had no idea what I was going to do with these prints.
How big are those? You said they're larger.
They're 5 to 6 feet wide, each
Okay.
of them. Well, there were a couple that were a little smaller than that, but just because I do these photographic mosaics, which some of these photographs took me 2 or 3 years to finish.
Huh.
Yeah. So, back then you didn't have the capabilities in digital photography that we do now, where now you can have a camera that will take 100 megapixel photos, so I had to zoom really far into the galaxy, take a bunch of photos zoomed in so I could stitch them all together like a big puzzle, so that there was enough data to be printed, really large, so you could walk up this close to it and see every little detail and all the nebulae and all that stuff. So a lot of work, a lot of time went into these. So anyway, I was very excited. Once I finally got all the color calibrated and all the proofs made, I finally picked, all right, these are the files, 10 of them, crazy invoice I had to pay. And I sold my aircraft so that I could afford these prints, which was a really big sacrifice for me, because that brought me a lot of joy. Anyway, I had no idea what I was going to do with these prints. Right, it took about 6 weeks to get them made. This is going to tie into one of the people you mentioned in your intro, and how I got connected with him. So I'm back in Vegas at this time. Living back in Vegas, and I have a friend named Larry Edwards, who I had no idea had like this little side job where he worked for Elton John's show. And so Elton John, he had a residence here in Vegas for 20 years, 15 or 20 years. He had a show here in Vegas. So he spent more time in Vegas than any other city. And Larry's job, essentially, Elton had 7 seats closest to his piano. The front row had 3 seats, second row had 4 seats that were always reserved to every show for his friends and family. But once in a while, somebody couldn't make it, right? So Larry's job was to fill in those seats, because they don't want any empty seats there, closest to his piano.
Right.
So Larry calls me randomly one day, this is back in 2016, and says, hey, this is super random. I hadn't even heard from him and I don't know how long. I didn't know him like that well. And he says, last minute, are you in Vegas right now? I said, yeah. Is there any way you want to go see Elton John's show tonight? It's really, really good seats. Yeah. It's like, what? Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to say no to that. So I go to Elton's show, and right before that, I'm going to get stuck in the details here. I actually said no because I had a meeting with a gallery director. So the night before this, okay, I'm just going to tell you this.
Yeah, let's go.
So the night before this, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with these prints, right? So the night before this, I intentionally go to the Las Vegas Strip, which I never do. I usually avoid it at all costs. I went there and I went inside there's really nice photography galleries in some of these hotels. So I went into every photography gallery I could find, and to try to learn mostly about the lighting and the framing and other aspects if I wanted to find a gallery for these prints. And most of the people working there are working off a commission, right? So they're not going to give me the time of day if I'm like, oh, I just made my first principal. And so I pretended like I just bought a house and I'm a collector. totally made up some stories. And, I just got a house. What kind of lights are these? If I wanted to install these lights into my house. But the last gallery I went to, she was the sweetest woman, probably in her mid 60s. There was nobody in the gallery. It was very close to closing. And she was so genuine and nice. And she said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm a photographer. I told her the whole story and the whole day that I just had going into all these galleries. And she was so excited about my story. And so she told the gallery director, this was the biggest gallery in all of Las Vegas, by the way, the last one I went to that day, 6,000 square feet. And she told the gallery director about me. So the next day, I get a call from the gallery director there, and he said, I'm about to go on vacation for 2 weeks, but Teresa was just telling me a little bit about you. I'd love to meet you before I go out of town. Is there any way you can meet tonight? Around 5:00 or something. I said, yeah, absolutely. That happens to be at Caesar's Palace, which is exactly where Elton John's show was. And I called Larry back and I said, wait, what time is the show? I have this meeting. And anyway, so we coordinated, and I threw my photos onto an iPad, a little mini iPad.
Yeah.
And, went to my meeting, and the meeting was going really well. And I said, I'm so sorry I have to cut this meeting short, but I'm supposed to go to Elton John's show tonight. Yeah. And he goes, oh, I'll show you a shortcut through the employee area. And so he takes me to the Coliseum entrance. And so I meet Larry, and, Larry wanted to meet an hour before the show because, his friends and stuff go backstage to the green room and have some drinks and stuff before the show starts. And, some of the band members are there. Elton's not usually in the green room, but anyway, I walk into the green room, and I couldn't believe this, but the bartender working in the green room was my friend Andrew. Andrew? And he's like, John, what's up? And he's like, oh, we're just catching up. And he's like, what have you been up to? I haven't seen you online at all. Cause I literally got rid of all my social media and everything. I was really focused on getting on these prints and stuff. And so I'm telling him all about these prints, and he goes, oh man, I want to see some of these photos. And I said, oh, I happen to have this iPad on me because I just had this meeting. And, I'm telling him, I don't normally walk around with an iPad, And so I'm showing him these photos, and the first photo that I show him is this photo of Batman, which is not like any of my other photos. That's another crazy story that sort of involves Obama in some weird way, why I happen to be in San Francisco this random day. But this is a very short story. I'll go on a little tangent here. So this Batman print was not planned. And I know that this is a podcast, so I can't show the photo, but there was this rooftop in San Francisco that I always wanted to get access to, but it's a restricted rooftop. And I emailed them over the years, and they just never responded back to me. And I literally had just drove overnight from Vegas to San Francisco, got there at 6 a.m. and I'm just driving around downtown, and I saw the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, and I'm like, wait, I think that's the hotel with the rooftop. So I park, and I just walk in, and I asked for the manager. I said, okay, look, I've been trying to contact you guys for years. I really want to take some photos from your rooftop. What do I need to do to make that happen? Because I will do anything. It's the best view of San Francisco ever. And she's like, why don't you come back and meet the general manager? So I come back. The general manager was like, all right, how about this? If you book a room with us for the night, I'll give you 15 minutes up there.
Okay.
This is an expensive hotel. It's like $600 for the night, And I was like, but the week I had just had, I will tell you, and I just had wonderful news that my friend was held hostage in Papua New Guinea, and he was alive. And the U.S. U.S. Embassy actually sent a rescue mission out to save my good friend's life and 12 other hikers. It's a whole crazy story, right? And all because of Obama and his right-hand aide, Marv Nicholson, got this rescue mission going and saved their lives. It was crazy. So that's the rescue mission was, I knew I wasn't going to sleep that night. So that's why I drove I wasn't going to, so I was like, I just need to get on the road and drive aimlessly because that's what I do sometimes to think. And anyway, so that's when I went to San Francisco. And so I'm like, I just had this crazy week. All right, I'll book the hotel, but can I shoot at night? Because I
Yeah.
tend to take nighttime cityscapes. And he said yes. And so I go up, this woman opens the door and all this. I run up these stairs and I only have 15 minutes, which is really frustrating because that's not nearly enough time to take a proper photograph, right? I mean, sometimes I need months. But so I'm rushing, right? And I'm setting up my camera as quickly as I can on the edge of this rooftop, and this railing. And I'm doing, one of these photo mosaics I was telling you about, like a panorama basically. And so every exposure is taking about 45 seconds. And so in between each exposures, I'm finally enjoying the view, looking around, and all of a sudden I notice on the other side of this rooftop is freaking Batman. I'm like, what the heck? I'm looking around. He's by himself. There's no cameras or anything. I'm like, and he starts walking toward me, and he's intimidating. This isn't like a Halloween costume. This is like Batman.
Yeah, that's funny.
And he's tall, and I'm starting to get a little freaked out because this could be some psychopath. I don't know. I'm on top of this building alone, and I don't know. I thought maybe I was on some hidden camera prank show, to be honest, which has happened to me once before. So I think I was a little traumatized by that. But he walks up to me, introduces himself. He was a really nice guy. I thought the story was going to be short. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
and
did he say I'm Batman? I mean, like that's
no. Okay. He didn't have this deep Batman. He was just like, hey, what's up?
Okay.
He was just like a normal guy.
Yeah.
And he shares his story with me, and it turns out he's obviously a Batman fan, but he had been working on this costume for years. He spent tens of thousands of dollars apparently on it. He had a motorcycle manufacturer construct the helmet, and the utility belt apparently worked, and just went all out with this. And after years of perfecting his costume, this was the first night he was finally done.
Okay.
And he was finally being Batman. And I wish I would have asked him how he got up there, because I just assumed he asked for the access like I did. And I said, can I please take your photograph? And he thankfully said yes. And I immediately realized I don't have my lighting equipment on me. And I'm so upset with myself because I wasn't really a portrait photographer. And he's wearing all black. It's pitch dark out, so I'm like telling him to hold really still for 30 seconds. It just wasn't turning out. Everything was blurry. And I realized I have an iPhone flashlight. So I did what's called painting with light, which is like an old technique people do for fun, which I didn't have a lot of experience doing that, but I actually ran in the image, painting him with my iPhone flashlight over 15 seconds. And the photo came out so good. I was so happy and I was so excited. And I show him the photo and I said, I'd be happy to send you these photos, and he refused to tell me anything about him. Wouldn't give me his name, no contact info, nothing. And still to this day, I have no idea who the man is. And this photo changed my career essentially because, and this will tie back into the Elton story, right? So going back to, I was talking to Andrew in the green room backstage of Elton's show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I told him this whole Batman story. And he's like, that is so crazy, whatever. So eventually it was time to, go into the watch the show. So we go out and we're watching the show. After the show, we go back to the green room to have some drinks. And Elton's assistant, his personal assistant, who I didn't know at the time, comes up to me and says, is your name John? And he said, yeah. He goes, here, sit down for a second. Andrew told me that you're a photographer. I said, yeah. He goes, what kind of photography do you do? And it's like, oh, I do, whatever, landscape, astro. I think I told him, I was trying to think, oh, maybe this will get me a gig to start photographing Elton's shows. I was like, oh, I photograph a lot of concerts, which I did have a lot of experience doing. But and he goes, well, Andrew was just telling me this crazy story about Batman or something, and he said I should really see your work. And I said, oh, okay. Well, and I told him this funny story why I have this iPad, and so I'm showing him these photos, and he goes, oh my God, Elton needs to see these. And I'm like, oh, is he a fan of photography or something?
Yeah.
And he gives me this look. He's like, yeah, he's the biggest collector of photography in the world. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I don't think he'll be interested in me then, and he goes, I'll be right back. He leaves, evidently talks to Elton. He comes back and he says, what are you doing on Friday night? And I said, oh, I think it's my friend's birthday. And he goes, well, you might want to cancel that. Elton wants to have dinner with you.
Wow.
I was like, what? And he goes, so why don't you come to the show on Friday? And after the show, we'll go to dinner. I'm like elated, right? This is just ridiculous. And meantime, though, my prints are supposed to be done any day now in Arizona. So I call the printer right away and I'm like, you guys, I need these prints right now. In a few days is the biggest meeting of my life with the biggest collector of photography in the world. Like, I will rent a U-Haul and drive to Arizona and back, if I need to. And they said they've already left our shipping or our facilities. They're getting crated at this other company. You have to call them. And so I'm on the phone trying to call all these places. And no matter what, everybody said, like, it's out of our hands. They're not going to arrive until after the weekend. And I'm so frustrated, right? But what can you do?
Yeah.
So Friday happens. I go to Elton's show on Friday. After the show, Elton personally invites me backstage because he wanted to apologize to me because he had to cancel our dinner.
Okay.
And he was very nice. And, obviously I'm like, can't believe I'm like talking with EJ, and he said, I'm so sorry. Something came up. I have to cancel our dinner, but I heard such great things about your work. And how about next Wednesday for lunch at 12:30? Are you free? And I'll never forget this. He literally said, if you're too busy, I understand.
Yeah.
I said, Elton, I don't think you realize how much this, like, how honored I am you even want to look at my work. Like, I don't care what's happening. I will be there whatever time and day you say. So he goes, great. I'll see you on Wednesday then. I kid you not, Tuesday, the prints arrive.
Oh, wow.
Like, after all you're working on these, and it took 6 weeks to actually get them printed and mounted and everything and shipped. And I called Elton's assistant. Mm-hmm. His name is also John. And I said, John, I can't believe these, but all the prints just arrived. Like, I need to rent a truck or something to bring to the meeting tomorrow. And he goes, rent a truck? How big are these prints? And I'm like 5 or 6 feet wide, a few 100 pounds. And he goes, okay, hold on. Do you realize we're going to his house? Like, you don't want to be obtrusive or presumptuous. Like, he's not going to buy anything. He just wants to get an idea of your work. So just show him on your iPad, like you showed me, or on a laptop or something. Like, and again, I barely know this guy. He's been working for Elton for 15 years, and I'm not a very assertive person, but I said, no, you don't understand. I have been working on these prints, essentially all my life. And these are the first prints ever, I'm telling them the whole story in honor of my dad and blah, blah, blah. And like, this just is such a weird coincidence that less than 24 hours after they arrive is the biggest meeting of my life with the biggest, and I said, how about I will just have them there outside in the parking lot just to have them there just in case, but I won't bring them in, of course, and he goes, okay, fine. So he says yes. So I pick him up at Caesar's Palace, and then he gives me direction. He shows me where to go to get to Elton's house. And, I show up at the gate and my name's on the list. It was crazy. It was so surreal. And then we go up this elevator and walk down this huge hallway, and there's EJ sitting on the kitchen bar stool and with his iPad, and he goes, oh, and he says JC, which apparently that's my name for him. So I said, EJ, and he gives me a hug and he says, I'm just about to FaceTime with my kids. I hope you don't mind. And I said, no, not at all. And so he's FaceTiming with his kids. And, I think Zachary was like, Daddy, who's that? And, oh, this is JC. It was just like, what is happening? Yeah. I'm sitting on his couch and he's FaceTiming with his kids. And anyway, so after he's done with that, he sits down next to me on the couch and he's like, all right, I'm really, really excited to see your work. John said, I have to see these. And he said, but, do you want to order some lunch? And of course, there's a waiter there. So we order from this menu, and I will never forget this. I'm so nervous, right? And I'm just like, I just quickly try to find the quickest, most simple meal on the menu. And I said, I'll have the chicken fingers. And as soon as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm like, oh my God, I'm ordering chicken fingers, Anyway, so
they were on the menu though.
I don't know why. I just thought that was so awkward, but anyway, so I'm like eating finger food, during our meeting. But anyway, so while the food's getting prepared, I'm telling him I really want him to see these prints, right? Because these chromogenic prints are very rare, and I'm so proud of them, and I haven't seen them yet. And I tell him this whole story about my dad, and this is all for him after he passed, blah blah blah. And I said, or if you want, we could just start off, with the laptop. He goes, let's start with the laptop. He doesn't know what he's getting himself into. And I was up, all night, preparing what order do I show these photos. I preloaded the full size, full res photo so I could zoom in and out without any delay, and I made it. This is my first presentation, right? So it was kind of like a story throughout the last decade. And the whole time he's really interested in the stories, but he's not giving me any feedback. And I'm just thinking, oh God, he hates him, or, he's just, I'm just so nervous and insecure about it. And so the food comes and he goes, hold on, is it okay if you don't mind if the food gets cold to you? And I said, no. And he goes, okay, I want you to go through all the photos again really, really quickly. I was like, okay. And he goes, faster, like fan through them really fast. He goes, okay, now go back. Now go fan through them again and back, like 4 times, right? I was like, okay, interesting. And he goes, okay, let's go eat. So we sit at the dining table and he's just really quiet and he's just kind of thinking, and he goes, how did you start out doing photography? Did you go to school for it? Or, and I basically told him what I told you earlier. And he goes, and who were your inspirations? What other photographers inspired you? Did you get inspiration from? And I got nervous because I said to him, I'm a little embarrassed because I don't really know who anybody is. I know who Annie Leibovitz is. Yeah. I know Ansel Adams, but I said I would look at other people's work, especially when I first started, and I would think to myself, oh man, there's no way I could ever amount to that. Like, I don't even know how they did that. And I would feel insecure and discouraged looking at other people's work instead of inspired. So I kind of just built up these mental walls around me, and I just didn't really pay attention to other photographers. And I don't know why I was embarrassed to say that to him. And he goes, that makes perfect sense because your work is unlike anything I've ever seen. Oh, wow. I'm like, okay, you're just being nice, right? He says, you don't believe me? And I said, no. I said, you've been collecting photography for 25 years. And, like that's just, I can't, that's just crazy to me that, and anyway, he started asking me very personal questions, why am I the first one to see these? And, we started talking about depression actually, because I told him that's how I got started, because photography got me out of my depression. And he said, that's exactly why I started collecting photography. That's what got me sober, was collecting photography. Wow. That, and so we got into this really, really beautiful conversation about happiness and fulfillment and insecurities too. Cause he started sharing, I mean, I don't want to get too personal publicly about, our conversation, but, it seems like he's pretty open about this, but he, a lot of his work, he looks back on and he's like, oh, it could have been so much better if I, wasn't high on drugs or rushing to get it done in time for this deadline, And I'm like, how can you be insecure about some of your music when the whole world's saying that this is some of the best music they've ever heard? And he goes, well, I'm telling you, these are some of the best photos I've seen. You don't believe me. What's the difference? I said, touche, EJ. Yeah. And anyway, it was just amazing. And so I was at his house that day for 4.5 hours. And I did bring one print in with me though, because again, this is my goal. I want him to see these prints. My very first print, it was my very first proof. So like the very first print. And it was only a 30-inch photo. And it was a photo of Batman. Okay. Just because the crazy story about Batman and the reason I was in San Francisco that day, that it just meant the most to me for that reason. And that's what I wanted my first print to be. So, but it wasn't framed. It wasn't mounted on a acrylic or anything. It was just the print with, bubble wrap sandwiched in cardboard. Right. So very unobtrusive. easy to hold. So I opened that and I showed him that print, and he goes, "Is this a chromogenic?" And I said, "Yep, this is from a light jet." And he goes, "A light jet?" And he knew, and in the right lighting, it just, and the substrate that it was printed on is just incredible. So, and he goes, "I know that this is your very first print, but is there any way I could have this?"
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, honestly, I was planning on keeping this my whole life, but yes, I would be so honored if you had my first print. In fact, I want to give it to you, And he goes, "No, but this is the quality of all the prints you told me about earlier that are outside downstairs." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, I want you to bring all of them up here right now."
Wow.
And I'm like, and there's John, his assistant, standing in the corner with his jaw on the floor. And I'm like, not going to say I told you so, but
Wow.
And so now all of a sudden we have his security guard, his, assistant, all these people like bringing up these crates up this elevator and down the hallway. And we're opening them all up. And we turned his whole living room into a pop-up gallery. But it didn't hit me until I was opening up the first one. And I'm like, and now I have an audience, like all of his staff, the waiter, everybody's there in the living room watching. And I'm like, "You guys, I haven't even seen these yet. I didn't have time. They just arrived last night. I didn't have the space or the time or and so my first time seeing my first prints after all these years was with him. And so
wow.
it kind of became, we went on this journey together, and I'd rip the plastic off of one of these pieces and we'd both go, "Whoa," and one of my favorite prints is this vertical piece called Neighbors of Our Galaxy. And so I'm telling Elton about, these different nebulae and I'm thinking in my head, I'm literally giving the Rocket Man himself a tour of our galaxy, telling him about our galaxy. Anyway, very life-changing day that was. He I can't believe I can even say this, but he bought every single print.
Did he really?
He actually bought 11 out of 10 prints.
Wow.
Because he wanted 2 of the Batman. Because the Batman, the first one he opened was 30 inches. And I said, "There's one 60 inches, twice as large downstairs." And he goes, "Oh, that's much too large." And that's when he said, "This is the quality of the prints though, And I said, "Yeah." And so when he saw the bigger Batman, he goes, "Oh my God, I like the bigger one." He goes, "Is there any way I can have both?" So you could have whatever you want. So
that's crazy,
man. That was a really crazy day. And then and he gave me like a sort of a pep talk lecture at the end. And he said, "You need to stop hiding yourself," basically. And so he's kind of been a mentor of mine over the years. And there's the 108 photo that you were referring to earlier. He's literally the only person I was showing my rough drafts to.
Let's talk about that particular photograph, the 108. This is the one that caught my eye first. Tell us about that. So that was taken in the 2017 solar eclipse.
Yep, August 21st.
And you had planned that out to be on.
Yeah.
Was it a commercial flight that you were on?
Well, that wasn't my initial plan. I had been visualizing this eclipse since I was 12 years old. I first learned about what a solar eclipse even was when I was in 7th grade. I was in my geography class. You said you're a high school teacher, right?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, so you would appreciate this because it just goes to show how incredible, how much of an influence teachers can make.
Yeah. It's weird. I'll hear back from students of mine, 5 years after they graduate, and it's the things that I didn't think meant anything that caught on with them and that changed the course of their life. Maybe they're at law school now or something like that. It was because of some just random comment that I made or something we did. So it's really neat that this seemingly inconsequential lesson on solar eclipses was what really stuck with you, and you've been thinking about that for years leading up to this date.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, she probably. I've been meaning, now that I'm finally back in Vegas, I have a whole storage unit with all my memorabilia stuff because I really have to dig out my yearbooks and figure out what her first name is and try to look up. I want to reach out to her.
Yeah.
Because what she did, I was in 7th grade. I remember it. I have a pretty bad memory, but this I remember so vividly. Um, she turned out all of the lights in the classroom, and she got out a globe, and she had one of the students hold a bright flashlight across the room representing the sun, and then she had a baseball representing the moon. Um, I just realized there's 108 stitches on a baseball. Anyway, 108, the story behind why it's called 108 is my dad's birthday was October 8th, 108.
Okay.
But it turned into this whole crazy, I will have to tell you about it. I lived in India for 3 years and led to the Dalai Lama and everything. And the Dalai Lama had 108, the big 108 in his security office, right? It's just, I will, if we have time, I can get into the 108 part of the story. But anyway, so has the baseball, right? She starts orbiting the baseball around the globe, right? The Earth, representing showing us, illustrating the moon's phases. So this is a quarter moon, this is a new moon, and a full moon, and etc. She said, every once in a while, though, the moon will perfectly align in between the sun and the Earth, creating what's called a total solar eclipse. Very different than a lunar eclipse. There's still many, many adults that don't know the difference. And so I'm very passionate about this because witnessing a total solar eclipse, now that I've witnessed several, is the most incredible thing you will ever see in your life. It is the most beautiful, most awe-inspiring thing you will ever see, but only if you go to the totality zone, which is the actually inside the moon's shadow. So she was telling us all about this, right? She said, if you're lucky enough and in the right place at the right time and you're inside that moon shadow, you would see the entire sky in the middle of the daytime suddenly turn completely dark, like it's midnight, in seconds. Like, imagine being outside at noon and then the whole sky suddenly goes completely dark in seconds. Like, this is what our ancestors used to get freaked out about. And they thought, a lot of crazy, stories got written about eclipses, right? Because it's the craziest thing you'll ever see. And so, and you can actually look at the sun with your naked eye. If you're inside totality, you can see these solar flares, prominences shooting out. You can actually see the magnetic field of the sun with your eyes. It looks like the eyes of God. I mean, it's just the craziest thing. So anyway, so she starts showing us all these photos of eclipses around the world. And I'm freaking out. Yeah. And I run home from school and I'm like, Mom and Dad, have you ever seen a total solar eclipse before? And they're like, no. Is that like when the moon goes all dark? And I said, no. You've never seen totality? And my dad's like, what's totality? And I'm like, how could you live your whole life not seeing one of these? So I go back to school the next day and I asked Miss Thompson, when's the next eclipse? Like, is there going to be one in the US? And she looks it up and she goes, 2017, which is literally 20 years later. And I'm like, I'm 12 years old. I'm like, I'm going to be 32.
Yeah.
When you're 12 years old, 32 is like eternity, right? So, but yeah, so I knew of this eclipse all those years. And so over the years, obviously I wasn't a photographer yet at this point. And so once I started doing photography, especially astrophotography, it was always in the back of my mind, when the eclipse date started approaching, because this was also the first solar eclipse to sweep across the US in 99 years. Yeah. So it was a very historic moment. And there's going to be another one, by the way, in exactly a year, April 8th, next year, 2024. There's going to be another one going from Texas to Maine. Oh, man. Like, the fact that there's two solar eclipses going 7 years apart in the same country is so rare. So highly encourage anybody listening to travel for that, and to actually go inside the moon shadow.
Yeah, I actually had it in my notes to make sure to ask you what your plans were for the next one.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I was lucky enough. I live in Middle Tennessee, and we were in the path of totality.
Amazing.
And so we were lucky enough that actually my high school made a big day of it. Everyone got the little solar glasses, to watch. And I actually took half of the day off and went home with my kids in the backyard. And it was so wild. So we live in a very small town in Tennessee, and all these people were they had all driven to be in these little towns that were along that path of totality. So we had
millions
parking lots that had not seen cars in years were full. It was really neat. And you're right, though. It's the wildest thing that I've probably ever seen. What I thought was really neat is how all the shadows on the ground were crescents as the sun was being covered.
Right. Isn't that so crazy? Yeah. And your shadow gets really
Yeah,
sharp too, if
exactly.
you notice that.
Yeah.
It's like it's this very eerie. Yeah, yeah. I man, to have your house inside the path of totality, that's so cool. You could just view it from your home.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And the next one next year
Wow.
is right on the edge of Tennessee, the path of totality. I think where I live here,
Yeah, yeah.
we're like 90%. So I think we'll have to drive
Okay.
west.
But you're gonna drive, right?
I mean, it's only like 3 hours west to be in the path of totality.
Okay,
So like,
you've got to do it
yeah, yeah.
because even what I learned, because I've learned a lot about eclipses now. NASA toured me through their heliophysics lab, and I've learned a lot about
Mhm.
heliophysics now. And even if you're at 99.9%
Mhm.
totality, it's literally 10,000 times brighter at
Oh, wow.
99%. It's literally a night and day difference.
Huh.
There's a old story from there was an eclipse in the 1800s that just skimmed through New York and it went through Manhattan. And if you were on the north side of 86th Street, you were in broad daylight. If you were on the south side of 86th Street, you were in
Huh.
darkness. Like it's that defined where you have to make sure you go to 100%. And this next one, by the way, I haven't even gotten into the story yet, but now I get on my soapbox to just try to encourage everybody to do this because it's just wow, you really get a feel for the solar system, when you do this. But the next this eclipse, the max totality was about 2.5 minutes in 2017. The max totality this eclipse is going to be over 4
Oh,
minutes,
wow.
which is very, very rare. So you definitely want to. I encourage everybody to look at a map on NASA's website, and actually, there's very detailed maps. Ernie Wright does these maps for NASA, and they're just very detailed, where you can actually zoom in and see exactly how long the totality will be in each place. So I highly encourage you and everybody else to go to the longest totality because it's really quick, as you know, and you just like, man, if only that lasted
I
longer.
know.
And there's a 360-degree sunset around
Yeah.
you. The temperature drops. It's just a very incredibly immersive. I don't know. It's just really incredible. So being on an airplane though was a bit different.
I'm sure.
I didn't get to see the shadows and the sunset and everything like that, but I did get quite a different perspective. And so this idea popped in my head. Um, because later on in life, I became, a photographer. Then I became a pilot, just for fun. I'm not a commercial pilot, but just the hang gliders and stuff I was telling you about. And so with these passions all merged together, I suddenly had this idea. I thought, I wonder if you could get up high enough in the air, could you actually see the moon's shadow being
Oh, yeah.
cast onto the earth? Like, could you actually see the shape of the moon's shadow moving across the earth's surface? That was just selfishly something I wanted to see. I wanted to witness that. And as a photographer, I wondered, could I actually capture this in an evocative way and to inspire, people and all that. So, and it happened. So once I had this vision, this idea in my head, I was very determined. I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to be on an airplane for this eclipse, but how am I going to do that? The moon shadow, it's only 60 miles wide and it moves at 2,000 miles per hour. So to intersect a plane that's going 500 miles per hour with the moon shadow that's going roughly 1,800 to 2,000 miles per hour, that's
Mhm.
tricky. And I was looking up these private charter jet companies, and I'm like, okay, I can't afford $40,000 to do this to charter a plane. But about a year before the eclipse, or maybe it was 9 months or so, Alaska Airlines did this whole social media thing. They announced that they were actually reserving an entire aircraft of
Okay.
theirs, and they were going to fly it over the Pacific Ocean to be inside totality, the moon shadow. But it was already reserved for all these astrophysicists and astronomers and whatnot. But they were keeping one seat open for a lucky winner to be on this flight. All you had to do was submit a 30-second video explaining why you should be the one on this plane. And I'm like, this is like a godsend, right? I'm like, this is it. This is my shot. This is no pun intended. But I thought I have to do everything that it takes. So I worked so hard for this video. It's actually why I bought this microphone.
Oh, okay.
I did a whole voiceover. I hired an animator for it. I attempted to compose music and stuff. It was basically a 30-second commercial. It was exactly 30 seconds, right? And I poured my whole heart and soul into this. And I was looking at all the other submissions being sent in because they were all public. And I noticed that most people were going way over the 30-second limit. So I thought they would be disqualified,
True.
right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these videos, nobody was doing any editing or anything. They're just speaking on a webcam and just talking, and that's it. Very little effort. And so my confidence started building. I'm like, I've got to have a good chance of this, because like I've spent like 50 hours on this. Yeah. So, but the problem is they didn't announce the winner of this contest until about a week before the eclipse.
Oh, okay.
And all my eggs are in this basket, right? And I was living in New York City, and New York was nowhere near the moon shadow path, right? So I didn't really have a contingency. And they announced the winner and I lost. And I'm like, what? Yeah, I'm devastated, right? And I saw the girl's video. No offense to her, I'm happy for her, but the video was just, not really any effort. And I was just like thinking, I have to do something. So I tried to reach out to all these Alaska Airlines executive emails and, are you sure you didn't see this video? And I just, yes, I lost, and I was very sad about it. And so now I'm just laying in bed depressed for a couple of days, and I'm just like, okay, it's all over, and finally roll out of bed. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to look at all the commercial flights around the US, look at all the flight paths for the morning of the eclipse. I'm going to compare these commercial paths with the moon shadow. And it didn't take too long until I was pulling my hair out. I'm like, okay, if this flight is leaving from LA and it's flying to Minneapolis at this time, then maybe if cruising speed is about 500 miles per hour, so maybe it'll cross, this area at this time for the moon shadow. And I'm like, okay, if any of these flights are 2 minutes delayed, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's no way this is going to work out. But right before giving up, it was actually a friend of mine, because I had all these people trying to help, and I'm like scrambling. And my friend Justin was like, check out this flight. And it was leaving from Portland, Oregon to St. Louis, Missouri. And an hour before the eclipse would start, and the eclipse was going eastbound, just like the flight. Mm-hmm. So the eclipse would catch up with the flight. So the flight would be in the air for an hour before the eclipse would catch up with us. But the flight path itself matched the moon shadow path. You know what I mean? So the moon shadow went right below Portland and right above St. Louis. And now our flight was going from Portland to St. Louis. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be a good chance that the pilot would be aware of this happening. And I don't know, but this is the best odds I have, because there's not an intersect to worry about, right? So I booked the flight right away. There was literally one seat left on the flight. Wow. I kid you not. It says one seat left. But the problem is I don't know if you've flown Southwest before, but the A list or whatever was sold out.
Yeah. Board first.
Be the first one on the plane. And so I'm, really worried. I need to be one of the first people on the plane. I need to get a window seat,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then by the way, I have to book another flight to go to Oregon the day before the eclipse, which turned out to be the biggest travel day in history. As you mentioned, like millions of people were traveling, and Oregon especially was a huge spot for it. But my nephew, my dad's grandson, lives in Portland. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I could stay with them the night before. And I'm so glad I stayed with them, by the way, because I'm like, what are you guys going to do for the eclipse? And they're like, oh, we're at like 97% totality. We'll just watch it from our backyard. And I'm like, no. So I gave them a whole pep talk, and they woke up like, 4 a.m. with their 4 and 6-year-old daughters, and was off a highway or something. And they left me a voicemail. They were in tears after witnessing it. So I'm so happy that they did that. But anyway, that's why I talk so much encouraging people to do this. But anyway, so I get to Oregon the night before, and I check in as early as I can, exactly 24 hours, mm-hmm. You could check in for your flight. I get group C, seat 18. And I'm like, I'm going to be the last person on this plane. I'm not even going to get a window seat, let alone a window seat that's up front so that the wing isn't in the way of the shot. All these odds are against me. So I go to the ATM and I have $600 cash with me when I get to the airport because I want to, I'm ready to bribe somebody for a window seat if that's what it takes. So I get to the airport really early for the first time in my life. I'm early for a flight and I'm always running late. But so I get to the airport and, I'm trying to convince this check-in agent to please give me, group A. And she was just one of those people that really enjoyed telling people no. So wasn't getting there with her. And so I get to the gate, and I don't know what the odds of this happening are, but that Alaska Airlines contest I was working so hard to win, they happen to be leaving out of the same city, out of the same airport, out of the gate right next to ours.
Oh, wow.
And they're having this huge eclipse party. There's like literally a red carpet event. Hold on, because you and I are on video. I'm just going to share this with you at least. But
that kind of rubs a little salt in the wound of not winning the contest.
Oh yeah, it was like, are you kidding me? I don't know if this will showing you my camera on here, but literally a red carpet event.
Yeah, really. There's a speaker for the people who can't see it. This is like a press conference, it looks like.
Oh yeah, there's news cameras everywhere. They had a step and repeat. All these famous astronomer people are there. And then I turn around and I look at our gate, and it says that our flight's 25 minutes delayed.
Oh,
and
geez.
I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And nobody's giving us an update or anything. So I'm just like pacing back and forth. I'm trying to rub elbows with all these Alaska people, right? Are you sure there's not an empty seat? I've got $600, they're like, nope, we are full. So they're all celebrating. They get on the plane, all happy. And now, and I saw the person that beat me in the contest, by the way. And yeah, it's just twisting the knife, and now my flight's delayed, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Because the airport is just outside of totality. So I'm like, should I leave the airport, get in an Uber and drive south 10 miles to at least see the eclipse from the ground,
Yeah.
And I was just I didn't know what to do. So finally, before I made that decision, flight attendant came on to the PA system announcing to our gate, she's like, thank you so much for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. There's a reason why we've delayed the flight today. As most of you have heard by now, there's a very historic moment happening in our country. For the first time in 99 years, a total solar eclipse is going across the US, blah, blah, blah. These three gentlemen there were three guys next to her. These three gentlemen standing next to me are three executives from Southwest Corporate that flew out from our headquarters in Dallas to be on the flight with us today because we believe we might have the best flight in the country for this eclipse. And we brought eclipse glasses with us, during the partial phases you can wear, because there are some people that go to totality and still wear the glasses. So if you go to totality, take your glasses off. You can look at the sun with your naked eye safely. Anyway, so and all the drinks are free on today's flight. They're all solar eclipse themed drinks. So a Bloody Mary is now called a solar flare on the flight, and they're all free on the flight. I think they saw all the press Alaska Airlines was getting, and they last minute, actually I know for a fact because now I became friends with these executives and whatnot, and I worked with Southwest's PR team for quite a bit, and yeah, they were like, yeah, we got to do something. And so I picked the flight that they chose to do, this last minute thing. And she said, oh, and the best news of all, the reason our flight is delayed is because we wanted to make sure we would be inside the moon's shadow.
Oh, cool.
And I'm like, oh, thank God. That's it. Yeah. That without that, you've got nothing. So I'm so relieved, but now I just keep thinking I should really introduce myself to these executives. But first, I get all my camera gear out of my bags. I rented the best cameras, these huge lenses. I had 3 cameras on me and these big lenses I put over my shoulder, to show maybe I'm legit, maybe I know what I'm doing. And I introduced myself. I tell them my story, and I showed them my Alaska Airlines video because it was only 30 seconds and it shows some of my work and my story. And they said, hold on a second, you were supposed to be on that flight, but you're on ours instead, and you still flew across the country from New York to be on this flight to take photos of this? I said, yeah, but I really need a window seat. I'm Group C. Yeah. And they said, hold on, come with us. I follow them, and I'm the first person on the plane.
Oh, wow.
Like pre-boarding. They introduced me to the entire flight crew, all the flight attendants, and both of the pilots, the first officer and the captain. And they said, this guy has been dreaming of this for a long time, and he wants, they basically, they did a whole introduction, which is so cool. And they said, pick whatever seat you want. Like, wow, that's everything I could have dreamed of, right? So now my next goal is to find the cleanest window.
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I always take photos when I'm on flights and stuff. I love getting the window seat and looking out the window the whole flight pretty much. But it's really hard to get a good, clean, sharp photo out of these airplane windows. All the smudges and scratches. Also, it's actually made out of layers of plastic. It's not like solid glass. So you can't actually angle the camera up or down or sideways, because that will distort the image and it'll ruin the clarity. You have to shoot straight out to have the most amount of sharpness. You have to shoot straight out of the window. So I run to the front of the plane and I said, you guys, I can't shoot out of any of these windows. The outside of the plane is too dirty. The captain, Captain Jackson, changed my life. He overhears me and he goes, hold on. Why don't you sit on the left side of the plane instead in the front row? I think I might be able to get your window clean. So the pilot himself gets into the cockpit. He gets his cleaning supplies. He gets out of the plane using the moving jetway thing you get on the plane with, and he reaches over and he washes my window from the outside of the plane. Huh. And I'll show this to you too. Oh, sorry, the glare from but if you look closely, behind his hand, that's the Alaska flag.
Okay.
So literally, I immediately thought of this quote by the Dalai Lama. He's one of my favorite people, and I've read most of his books. And he says in one of his books, remember that sometimes not getting what you want can be a wonderful stroke of luck.
Yeah.
Here I was completely devastated 20 minutes ago. I thought it was all over. I was literally on the verge of tears, and just like literally 20 years. I'm just so... And now I'm getting treated like freaking royalty by Southwest executives and the pilot himself washing my window. Yeah. And so now I just think I might as well ask for more. So I start collaborating with the captain. I said, okay, look, I've been envisioning this for many, many years. I really want to make it look like we're in space, because the moon's actually going to black out the Earth's atmosphere. So we're going to be able to see through the atmosphere in the middle of the daytime. That's why my image looks like it was taken from space. And also the moon shadow, the bottom right part of that photo is the moon shadow, that dark area. So that's also why it looks like I'm in space, because it looks like day to night, So anyway, I had all this thought out, but I said, I need to get at least 180 degree view of the Earth. So I need to do what's called a photographic mosaic and, stitch it all together. And I'm trying to tell him about these advanced photography techniques. And I said, I'm shooting through this little 8-inch wide window and I can only shoot straight through. So is there any way you could sort of turn the plane around when we're in the moon shadow? And he's like, rolling his eyes. This is obviously an absurd request. And I told him that. I was like, I know how absurd this is to ask. He's like, it is, but I mean, considering this is such a historic day and we have some executives on board and everybody's so excited, and it would be nice to try to give a nice view for both people on both sides of the plane, so he's trying to justify it, right? So he's like, it's a real long shot here, but I will ask air traffic control, but don't get your hopes up. And I'm like, thank you. That's all I could ask for, right? So we climb up, we go to 35,000 feet cruising altitude, and the eclipse is getting it's getting slimmer and slimmer, right? The partial eclipse where the sun kind of looks like a crescent moon. And, I'm getting so nervous, and I've got all these cameras. I have one camera suctioned to this window. And then I bought the fastest, most expensive memory cards possible, because every photo I'm taking, I'm bracketing 7 different exposure brackets with them. And I took 1,200 photos in these few minutes, wow. But, yeah, it was a lot. Anyway, so we climb up, we go to 35,000. About 5 minutes before totality hits, the captain comes on to the intercom and he's like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do what's called an S-turn maneuver. And I'm like, oh my God, he got the green light. He got the okay to do this. And he's like, I'm going to do a turn real quick before totality starts, just to give you all an idea of what to expect. So he does this left turn and this right turn, right? And I immediately am like, he's not turning the plane enough. I'm not getting enough of the earth, and the eclipse is too high up. Like, it's getting warped, and the layers of plastic in the window. All these things are going wrong, but it's obviously out of my hands now. But all of a sudden, the flight attendants get a call from the captain, and I'm in the front row, right? So the two flight attendants are sitting in the jump seat facing me, and they get a call from the captain, and they said, John, the captain wants to know, how was that turn? I'm like, are you kidding me? This is now my private jet that I wanted. I said, well, since you're asking, it wasn't good enough. I need a sharp. He said it wasn't good enough. He needs a sharper turn, as sharp as possible and wider. And so he gets approval again by air traffic control. He climbs up another 4,000 feet to 39,000 feet. So he could do these sharper turns, because you actually lose altitude when you turn a plane too sharp. And so he had to like clear airspace, go up higher to do these sharper turns. And he ended up turning the plane around 5 different times while we were in the moon shadow. Now, I feel bad for all the people listening, because I'm showing you all these photos, but this is my favorite photo of all, because the captain, we became friends after, and he sent me our flight path later. There's the practice turn, and then all of those, the last 2 turns were just like,
I was gonna say, those last 2 were pretty significant turns there. That's
which that very last turn, this is my favorite part of the whole thing, because I was still struggling. I was pretty certain I had all the data of the Earth. Like, I captured everything. I wasn't, even though it's a really wide angle shot, I was very far zoomed in for every photo, kind of what I was telling you about before about photo mosaics, so that I could blow up this image to be, literally, you could blow up this photo to be 20 feet wide at 300 DPI and walk up this close to it, and it's sharply detailed without any enlargement. And so that was my whole goal. And also, the further zoomed in you are, the less the smudges and scratches of the window would show up.
right.
But there was one last puzzle piece of the mosaic that I still didn't have a good photo of, and that was the eclipse itself, which is kind of an important piece.
Yeah.
It was just this plastic window. It was just not sharp, or I wasn't getting any of the detail that I really wanted. But the flight attendants, again, they're looking through their little door window, which is that circular window. That's in this particular plane, that's angled up a little bit higher than the passenger windows, because the eclipse was a little too high for me, and so that's why I was getting distorted. And that's solid glass too. That cross-check window, that's made out of solid glass. I think it's actually magnified a little bit, it seems. But anyway, so they are freaking out, and they said, John, the eclipse is right on our window. Come here, get up. Which is so amazing of them, by the way, because this is an incredible moment for them. And they move out of the way so I could get this photo. And I look through it's such a small little window, and the eclipse is perfectly centered in it. And I didn't realize until thinking back, this is the first time I'm seeing the eclipse with my naked eye, because I was just so consumed with all the cameras and stuff. And I was so awestruck, I almost forgot to take the photo. I was just so like, this is insane. And I was like, oh my God, I got to take this photo. And I kid you not, as soon as I take the photo, the eclipse is over and it's broad daylight. And I didn't know until after I looked through all the photos later, but I got what's called the diamond ring moment, which is the last, that's how much data I have, by the way, in this.
Those are large.
In this image. Look how large that part of the photo
is. That's just that one section of the photo of the larger
how large.
Yeah, in 108 itself, it's just a tiny portion.
Yeah, because when you see the whole image, the eclipse itself looks really tiny,
right? Yeah,
which is, I think, what also makes the image unique. My goal wasn't to try to take the most unique photo of an eclipse ever or anything like that, but it's interesting that this ended up becoming the most photographed moment in history. Like, millions of people are taking photos of the same thing happening, right? And it broke NASA's online viewing records by 7.5 times any previous record. 200 million people like witnessed this moment. I mean, it was a really, really huge really uniting moment in our country too. And none of that really occurred to me until I released the photo. And and the diamond ring moment, by the way, because I realized I didn't finish the diamond ring, it looks like a diamond ring when you look at it, because there's one bright spot in the circle ring. And it's because that's right before the eclipse starts and right after is when you get these moments where the last sliver of sunlight is shining through the canyon walls of the moon's surface. So you're getting that effect because of the actual mountains on the moon. Isn't that just
wild.
so cool?
Yeah. Huh.
And I happened to get that split second moment, that moment that the flight attendants told me to shoot out of their little tiny window when the eclipse just happened to be centered perfectly in this. It's just like the whole thing just feels so serendipitous and meant to be. And so, and I'm thinking, I land in St. Louis, right? That's actually where my dad was born, and I'd never been there. So, but I realized that I hadn't even made a plan. I didn't like have a hotel booked or anything. I didn't even have a flight back to New York. Like my mind did not go that far. I just wanted to get on the flight. And so, the way social media is nowadays and our attention span, like, I thought I got to get this photo out online now, like today or tomorrow. So I literally stayed in the St. Louis airport all night trying to stitch this thing together. And I quickly realized I am never going to get this done. I need way more time. But I don't usually share this, but it was interesting because I actually posted a raw photo of it on my Facebook just because I was like, I want to get something out there, and it started going viral more than anything I've ever posted. And I don't have I'm not a big social media guy or anything, but there were a few people that messaged me. One person called me, and all of these people, one is a very famous photographer who kind of mentored me when I first started. She reaches out to me and she's like, you need to take that photo down right now. My other friend, who's very successful in the art world, that Elton actually introduced me to, he calls me and says, take that photo down right now. And so these people that are way more successful than I am, and they know what's going on, they're telling me, take that down. So I delete it. I post, please, if anybody downloaded that, take it off. Thank God for them, because what I ended up with a year later, I spent hundreds of hours on this.
I'm sure.
I didn't release it until the 1-year anniversary. And believe it or not, I was rushing to get it done in time for the anniversary. I mean, this thing I had to buy a brand new computer to process it, because the file ended up being so massive, like all these layers and stuff on the software. And it was just crazy. And then the way it got released to the world was just another thing I never could have imagined. And Jack Dorsey, the founder, CEO of Twitter, former CEO now of Twitter, wanted me to, it's this other wild, crazy story, but Elon Musk, back when people liked him on Twitter, it was one of the biggest events Twitter's ever done. Like every Twitter employee from around the world, from 47 offices, were going to be in one place at the same time. And everything was a big surprise for them. But since I was the photographer, I had to document the whole thing, which was a lot of pressure because this was a massive event. I had to hire 4 photographers for it. And I was on one of these conference calls with the events team of Twitter, and they said, okay, this is really, really hush hush, but the big surprise at the end of the week is Elon Musk is going to be the surprise keynote speaker. And I'm like, what? And I've been this huge Elon fan my whole life, and I, because I'm a space guy, right? And SpaceX, I'm just like, fanboying like crazy ever since 2007 or so. And anyway, I happened to be reading Elon Musk's biography written by Ashley Vance while this was happening. And Southwest Airlines is mentioned in his biography multiple times, because when in the early days, in 2008, the recession hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of his rockets kept blowing up. His Tesla cars were also blowing up.
Yeah.
All of his investors started bailing out, right? And he was losing all of his money. So he started flying. He couldn't afford his private jet anymore. So he started flying Southwest Airlines to go back and forth from his headquarters in LA and his headquarters in San Francisco. And so in the early days, according to Ashley Vance's biography, in the early days at SpaceX, SpaceX's mission statement was to one day become the Southwest Airlines of space in terms of affordable space travel, right? Because Southwest is supposed to be the affordable. And I'm like, holy crap, my photograph is literally their mission statement in an image.
Yeah, really.
The Southwest Airlines in space, right? I was like, that's such a weird coincidence. So now I'm all excited because I know what my job's going to be. My job is going to be to take a photo of Jack and Elon backstage before Elon's speech, right? That's just like how these events go. That's going to be my job. So I know for a fact, it's very likely I'm going to be in a private room with Elon.
Okay.
Right. 3 weeks before before the anniversary. So 3 weeks before I'm about to release this photo, I had a whole plan for it. And I'm all excited, right? And I decided I would only probably have like 2 minutes at best with Elon, right? That's not enough time to tell this story, as you can tell, since I don't know how long it took me to tell this story, but I wanted to be able to like write him a letter or something. And I was thinking like, I really want him to have a print of this.
Yeah.
But I hadn't printed a print of this yet. And so if I'm going to give him a print, he would have print number 1 of this photo that I really have a good feeling about. And but I've been such a big fan of his, and I thought, I would really love for Elon to have the very first print of this. But I didn't want to give him like a little tiny print. I wanted to give him the laser crystal print that I do on all my limited editions, but it's so heavy, and I wanted to give him a decent size image, that you could appreciate the detail of the image. But I didn't want him to have to carry it around on him. So back when I used to shoot weddings, I used to do these wedding albums. Some of these wedding albums are really expensive, like $800 for a wedding album, because it's printed in such a way and created so that the pages of the wedding albums themselves don't bend. And no matter what page you're on, the whole book
lays flat,
lays out seamlessly. And there's like barely a seam in the middle, right? So I went to the printer in New York, and I'm like, okay, what if we did this chromogenic printing and mounted on acrylic and aluminum, back mounted, all this stuff, right? But what if we cut it up in thirds, kind of like a letter you get in the mail? So you fold it up.
Okay.
And so Dear Elon would be, when it's folded up, Dear Elon, the second flap would be my letter to him and the story and all that or whatever. And then you open up the third flap, and it's the whole image with a very small seam on the 2 seams. And we made it just the right size so that it fits inside of a jacket pocket. So I arrive in San Francisco, right? And Leslie Berlin, the CMO, sweetest woman ever. And she's like, Elon canceled. I was like, what? It's like, Elon's not going to make it. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm so upset. I was like, I just worked so hard for this quick moment with Elon, right? To give him this gift. And I'm like, that's messed up, and I'm like, I'm so disappointed. And, it was several days long. Right. And so I didn't know Jack Dorsey that well at the time. He, just the events and stuff, he seemed like a cool dude, but I didn't know him that well. This event, however, was not publicly known. There was no press there or anything. So he was just being very transparent with his company, right? A whole company, all hands, all of his employees in one place. And he was just being very authentic. And I just thought, man, this guy just gets it, like big picture, like he just seems like a really down to earth, like genuine person. And he even, I'm a big meditator, and he even led his whole company, 5,000 employees, into a meditation for 20 minutes. So this giant auditorium that's literally the size of a football field is in complete silence. And I was just meditating in the aisle. I wasn't taking photos because it would be too distracting, the sound. And I was just like meditating. I was right there in front of him. He was on the stage, and I'm just in the aisle right in front of him. And it was during that meditation that I was like, I just thought, I'm going to give this print to Jack. They've been my client for 7 years. This is a great way to say thank you. And so I, had my assistant covering for me, and I went upstairs to this empty ballroom, giant ballroom to get a quiet moment to rip off the Elon letter and instead write this letter to Jack. And as soon as I write the name Jack, which was really weird because that was my dad's name, I'm writing the name Jack. And as soon as I write the name Jack, Jack walks into the ballroom.
Okay.
And he's by himself. I never see him by himself. He's always super busy. And he's walking right toward me to walk past me to go get something, you know. And he walks past me and I go, Jack. And he goes, yeah, what's up? And I said, I literally just wrote your name. I'm about to write you a letter. And you walk into the room and here, open this. You know, it's a heavy thing. And he opens it up and he goes, what is this? I said, do you remember the Great American Eclipse last year? And he goes, yeah, it was the biggest trending conversation Twitter's ever had in its history. Wow. It broke Twitter. Yeah. It's like, really interesting. Okay, good to know. Well, I took this photo from an airplane and he goes, this is the photograph? I said, yeah. And he goes, wait, what? You took? So now he wants to know the whole story, right? Mm-hmm. So I tell Jack the whole story that I just told you. And Jack says, okay, here's what's going to happen. In 45 minutes, I'm going to introduce you on stage. And I would like you to share this image and this story in front of my entire company and replace Elon's keynote. Wow. Do you think you can do that? And I'm like, I'm trying to keep my composure, right? But I'm freaking out. I've never given a speech in my life. And my first speech is totally unprepared in front of 5,000 people. Okay. So, but I was like, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. You know, and I was like trying to look very confident, even though I was feeling the opposite. And he's like, okay, well, do you have a high res photo of this? Because their screen was just the most incredible screen. And so I was like, I have my laptop upstairs in my hotel room. I have a high res photo of it. And he goes, okay. And I want you to show some of these behind the scenes photos. So I had to like rush and all this. And he said, I'm going to break everybody out of the auditorium, all 5,000 people, you know, so that we can try to get this onto the screens and all that. Anyway, all this stuff was happening. And then all of a sudden he introduces me and I'm off on the wings. You know, I'm off stage and I'm like literally shaking, right? I'm like, what is happening? And especially the introduction he gave me, he told his whole company that Elon Musk was supposed to be here giving this keynote, but he canceled. So now here's this guy. And it was so funny too, because he was like, how many of you know photographer John? And there was like 3 people that were like, woo, you know, just the events team. And they were the only people that know me. And then he's like, okay, well, you're going to know him real soon. And, you know, he gave just the sweetest introduction. And I was like, I've never been this nervous in my life, right? So I walk up on stage and, you know, all these bright lights. And I noticed that I can't really see the audience, right? Because it's so dark. I can only really see the front row or so. And there's Jack and Leslie sitting right there center in the front row. And I just thought to myself, okay, all I'm doing is telling Jack and Leslie the story again, just like I just did 45 minutes ago. And all of a sudden all my nerves and everything just went away. And it was the most beautiful moment of my life. It was crazy. I don't know how it happened. And that started my whole keynote speaking career now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
that's how you started your keynote speaking career. It's funny, when we first started talking, and I mentioned that you spoke on topics like curiosity, passion, and perseverance. I was going to ask you to tell me a little bit about, you know, those topics, but I actually, while I was listening to you tell this, what's most clear to me is this topic of perseverance. Like everything that you just told me is a result of you persevering through, you know, these hurdles and hardships and, you know, events that seem like, you know, these totally derailing events, like not getting on the Alaska Airlines flight, like, you know, your flight being delayed and all these things just working out, you know, like you said, the Dalai Lama's quote. It also, I feel like that quote only applies if you persevere through these events too and keep trying.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so I think that's really neat that, you know, I had those things even underlined on my little note sheet here, and it's clear to me what you would speak about in terms of perseverance. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about also was your blog, which is Jon Carmichael, An Unexpected Journey. And this is a blog that you started, I'll introduce it. I guess this blog was your quest to spread your father's ashes over 20 locations, 9 different countries, right? So tell
Hmm.
me about like what what's the
Yeah.
story there?
Well, yeah. Thanks for reading about that. Yeah, that blog. I sadly I started that 10 years ago. That's when my dad
Hmm.
passed, and this is the Carmichael Clan podcast. So um, that's when I never really knew a lot about my heritage growing up. I actually thought we were Irish growing up for
Okay.
some reason, and I found out at some point we were Scottish. I'm like, oh, okay. And anyway, so when he passed, I, just became curious to know more. It started out, I wanted to know more about my dad because he was much older. My dad was born in 1931, so he was 55 years old when I was born, and so. But my dad had a previous first marriage where he had 4 kids, so I have 4 half siblings that are literally my oldest sister is 32 years older than me.
Wow.
She's
Yeah.
68 years
Huh.
old. So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, and we're very close for how far apart we are physically and age wise. And anyway, I just started asking my family members more questions about my dad when he was younger. What was he like, and all this, and that's when I learned more about Hoagie Carmichael, and my cousin Kim knows a lot about the Carmichael
Okay.
heritage, right? So she heard from the grapevine that I was interested in this, and she's like, "Oh, I'd love to tell you more about all my research." And then that's when I even found out about Carmichael, Scotland, that there was still a village there, and I'm like, "What? That's
Yeah, yeah,
crazy."
yeah.
So I thought, okay, I got to go to Scotland, I got to check this out. And my friend came along with me, and it turned into this big 6-week journey. As far as spreading his ashes, that was an interesting. So the night before my dad passed, he had to get open heart surgery, and it was a very sudden, unexpected thing. And he had this rare condition, only exists in like 0.01% of people, of course, but he didn't have enough ventricles around the right quadrant of his heart. So the surgery went well, it was a success, but after the surgery, his heart just wouldn't come back,
Okay.
so he was on life support for a little while. And I was the power of attorney, had to make all these tough decisions. But the night before his surgery, I took him to the hospital. I'm so grateful for this night because I stayed there all night with him, and I'm like, all right, Dad, let's be real. You're 81 years old. You have open heart surgery tomorrow. I don't want to pretend everything's all great. There's a chance you don't make it, right? It's got to be on your mind. Let's talk about that.
Hmm.
What are your wishes? What are your, like, what? We just had the most incredible and deep conversation that I found out so many things about him in just those few hours that I never knew
Hmm.
about. And so I encourage people to do that, with anybody that they know. And he actually said, my dad was very Christian, and he wrote a lot of Christian poems, and even some of his board games he turned into like kids Christian board games and stuff. Is very cool. But he said, I don't know what the Bible says about, cremation or anything, but I always thought I would like to be cremated. And I'm like, really? So if it wasn't for that night, I certainly wouldn't have cremated him. So that's what we did. And cremating was very weird to me at first. And, what do you do with these ashes and all that? And he has 6 kids, and who gets what,
Yeah.
so we just divided the ashes evenly amongst us, and everybody could do whatever they wanted with him. And so I had a lot of adventures with my dad in his later years. We didn't do a lot of traveling when I grew up, and that's why I love traveling so much, because I was kind of deprived of it growing up. We would just go to Minnesota most of the time, which was great to visit family, but that's kind of all we did on trips. But I surprised my dad in 2007 with tickets to flights to go to Europe. My dad had never been out of the country. Well, he served in the military in Panama, but besides that, he had never been out of the country before. And so we went to 6 countries in Europe together, and we just had the most wonderful time. And my dad loved history, so I'm sure you guys would have hit it off. I mean, huge history buff. But anyway, so I don't know where it came from, but I didn't want his ashes to just sit there, and I kind of went on this whole journey, because I was grieving. I was really, really grieving losing him. And we all handle grief in different ways, and apparently the way I handle grief is to explore cultures and all that. And I didn't travel that much before this happened, and I don't know, his passing just kind of ignited this whole thing. But so I brought, at first I would just bring his ashes with me just to have him with me, and then I would be in these unbelievably beautiful places, and I'm like, oh my god, my dad would love this, he would have loved this. I'm like, well, he's with me, I'll just leave a part of him here, so he's been here now, and so it kind of just evolved in that way. And my one of my closest friends, Jeff, he kind of is an older brother. He's 20 years older than me, and he was our next door neighbor growing up. He used to be a race car driver and all this. He's really cool guy. And his mother had passed right before my dad, and his mother got cremated, and he was spreading some of her ashes in some of her favorite places and stuff like that. And he said, he encouraged me. He said, I've had so much fun, just having these moments with her, even after she's gone. It just makes it feel like they're still there in some way, and you're honoring them in a certain way. So yeah, and I have my dad's ring on my finger. I've never taken it off since the day he died. And my dad was a very, very sentimental person, just incredibly kind. And so I don't know. It just helps me grieve. Even 10 years later today, I think of him a lot. And so, and that's a big reason why the eclipse photo I titled 108, because that's a long story. That not only is 108 his birthday.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You mentioned that was his birthday.
Yeah,
right?
But that wasn't even a thought, a glimpse of a thought. The whole year I'm working on that eclipse photo, I'm thinking in the back of my head, what in the world do I call this photo? Because I'm not going to title it The Great American Eclipse, or I hate it when artwork is titled untitled.
Oh, yeah.
It's I can't think of a good name for it the whole time I'm working on this. And then 108 was always just became sort of my lucky number over the last 10 years. But it started showing up in my life in very bizarre ways. Like when I went to India, I originally went to India in 2017 for a 10-day meditation retreat. And I ended up canceling my flight home, and I stayed there for 3 months. Even though I had just moved to New York and I was paying rent for this apartment, I stayed in India. And I got room number 108 when I first got to the retreat. And then on the schedule was like meeting time, 6 a.m. meditation, whatever, 10:08 a.m. this, or 1:08 p.m. this. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. Why would all the times be, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, but 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock have an 8 at the end?
Yeah,
I was like, that's really weird. So I asked the teacher about it. I said, is there some kind of significance to the number 108 or anything? And because I had noticed like numbers 108 in certain places in India. And he's like, he kind of laughed and he said, is there a significance to that number to you? And I said, well, yeah, it was my dad's birthday, and I kind of just noticed the number a lot, but that's probably just me being silly. And he goes, well, 108 is the most significant number in all of Eastern philosophy and religion, especially in the Eastern world. The mala prayer beads that they wear.
Oh yeah.
The purpose of that is you're supposed to repeat a mantra a certain amount of times. And so you wear that necklace and you move one bead every time you say the mantra, so that when you make a full circle, that you've said it the exact amount of times without having to count.
Yeah. There's
108 of those. You're supposed to repeat that mantra 108 times. In Buddhism, the 108 is sort of more of a symbol, or it's more symbolic of of the 1 is supposed to represent the self, the ego. The 0 represents impermanence, that everything is impermanent and inherently empty. That's a big part of Buddhist teaching. And the 8 is the infinity symbol, time and space. So it's supposed to be a symbol and a number encompassing all things. And Muslims are supposed to visit 107 temples in their lifetime because the 108th temple is supposed to be heaven. He started just laying out all these weird 108 things to me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is so weird that this is just my lucky number, and now there's actually some significance to it. I just get really inspired to, and a lot of the students in the retreat were encouraging me, like, India is a very special place to just, you don't make a plan when you go to India, you just put your arms up and ride the wave and let. India has sort of its own goals with each person. and that's what I did. I didn't make a plan, and so I left this retreat, and this is my first time in a developing country too. So I was pretty culture shocked, and I'm in the middle of this town called Rishikesh, and they don't really have hotels there. It's more of guest houses. So I had no idea where I was going to stay. I didn't have any internet. I'm just walking along the streets of Rishikesh, and I noticed this sign up this hill that says the Veda House. And I just came from a Veda retreat. And the Vedic texts are supposed to be the most ancient texts in all of civilization, like about 5,000-year-old texts like Sanskrit and stuff, where that came from. Anyway, so I just learned all about the Veda text. So I go to this Veda house up this hill, and I meet the family. I'm like, oh, do you have a room available? They give me the keys. They give me room number 108. Yeah, wow. I was just laughing, and I'm like, I just had room number 108 at the retreat, and I just learned all this stuff. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. So now I asked the family, what's the best place to have lunch? And they said, oh, you should go to this place called Little Buddha Cafe. It overlooks the Ganges River and all this. So I go there, and it's there that I meet this other American girl who her plans had just got canceled too. She was supposed to be volunteering for this orphanage, and for whatever reason it got canceled. And so she doesn't have a plan. We're just going over each other's stories. And she's like, so what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm a huge fan of the Dalai Lama, and I've always wanted to kind of go see, he lives in the Himalayas, right. And I've wanted to see the Buddhist colony and get a feel for where the community that he lives in. But I have no idea how to get there. I hear these horror stories about this, windy paths, and you can't rent a car there. They don't rent cars in India, so you have to get a bus or something. And I'm talking all about the Dalai Lama, and this other random girl at another table turns around and she says, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation. But I just moved from Dharamshala, which is where the Dalai Lama lives.
Right.
I was just living there for 3.5 years. She was this Australian girl. And I just moved here yesterday to Rishikesh. I can tell you everything you need to know about Dharamshala, and I can just put you in touch with my driver. People have drivers that are kind of like taxis, and he can take you there, and I'll tell you where to stay and all this. And it just happened on its own. As I was just having this conversation with this stranger, and this other stranger turns around and butts in, who just moved from there after living there for 3.5 years. And she's like, but also, my ex-boyfriend's best friend's sister works for the Dalai Lama. I was like, what? I was like, why are you telling me this? She's like, I don't know. I just hear you so passionate about him that, I don't know, maybe there's a chance, he's giving a teaching, or maybe, you can have a private audience with them. And so before I know it, I'm on the phone with this guy named Babu, and he's like, okay, I have to tell you, it is very rare for the Dalai Lama to meet with anybody, especially when he's at home, because when he's home, he's here to rest. He's traveling the world, he's getting older, and when he's home, he rests, and but he's finishing up a 10-day teaching in Bodh Gaya right now, which is where the Buddha experienced enlightenment. And so he will be here for 7 days next week. So if you want to come up here, but it's a very, very slim chance, don't get your hopes up. I was like, done. I'll be there, So I went up there, and sorry, I'm going into this other story now, but I will loop it back to 108, I promise. But this is such a crazy story. So I, every single day, right, Babu would call me and say, I'm sorry, I haven't heard from their offices, and I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm having a great time. And Babu was taking me on his motorcycle. I'd never been on a motorcycle before, by the way. So, he's like taking me on the back of his bike up these steep cliffs and on the Himalayas with his biker friends. And we'd be out all day, some days. And we're on these like literally these cliffs, the edge of these cliffs, and like without a real road, and it's like, I have no helmet on or anything. And, sometimes you're just living, and you just, I'm not encouraging reckless behavior or anything, but,
Right.
but sometimes you just have to set fear aside and just, this is a really unique once in a lifetime experience I'm having, and I'm just going to live it to the fullest, and stop being scared about things, and getting robbed or all these other things. And anyway, so day after day, Babu and I, we become friends, and the Dalai Lama's last day is the next day. And he's like, I'm sorry, man, it just didn't work out. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, I've really loved being here. And I went to the Dalai Lama's temple many times, and he kind of lives on this compound on top of this mountain. Anyway, so the last night at like 11:30 at night, Babu calls me and he goes, I can't believe it. The Dalai Lama said he will meet you. I was like, what? I was like, I can't believe it. I probably shouldn't speak in an accent. But anyway, it's
good for the storytelling.
Yeah. Babu is just, he was so like excited for me. And he was just kind of like, what? He's like, we have to be there at 5:30 in the morning, or, you're going to meet him at 6 a.m. And I'm not a morning person, by the way. So I was like, okay. But I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep because I was so excited. And I'm like, what do I wear? What do I say? All these. And so Babu picks me up on his motorcycle at 5:30 in the morning, or 5 in the morning. And we get there to his Holiness's home. And he has so much security. I swear he has more security than the president of the United States because of everything happening with Tibet and China and stuff. It's crazy. So I get to the security office, and they're checking me and they're looking at my passport, visa, all this stuff, right? And so they sit me down on the couch. I have to fill out all this paperwork, and I sit down, and right in front of me is this giant book. It's a photography book. I'm going to have to show you another photo here of all of the most sacred places of all religions, like the most sacred places in the world. And hold on, I'm almost there on my.
While you find it, it's always been a dream of mine to meet the Dalai Lama too.
Oh, really?
When I was in college, I bought a white silk scarf that I could hopefully present him with one day. And so it's sitting on my bookshelf, just right 4 feet from me.
Oh, that's so funny.
I've got a shelf of books that he has written over time. He wrote a book once called if I can see it from where I'm at. Shoot, I can't see it. But he wrote a book once talking about how religion and science kind of melded together.
I can't believe
it was a really neat
you're bringing this up. The universe in a single atom.
That's what it is. Yeah.
That's the first thing I said to him when I met him. That's so funny that you bring that up. Oh, that's so crazy. By the way, here's the photo. This is on the coffee table.
Oh, wow. At
108.
Yeah. Huh.
Shades of Divinity. I don't know why it's like mirrored on your end, but yeah, it's this book, this giant book of photography. It's the book that every visitor of his looks at, right? Because I was sitting there for like 45 minutes, and there it is, 108, just huge on the title of this giant book, and I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And so finally, they escort me up this long driveway up this hill, and there's His Holiness standing at his front door to greet me.
That's a really cool story.
I still don't know why he agreed to meet me, because they were speaking Tibetan to him when they introduced me. I did hear the name Obama when they introduced me. So I don't know what they said to him.
Probably didn't hurt.
But it's interesting because I ended up working with him for a few days later on because of this. But when he first met me, I noticed whenever he meets somebody, he says, "Where are you from?" That's the first thing he always says, when, at least it seems that way from what I've seen. When he first met me, he asked me, how long are you in India? And I said, I don't know. I canceled my flight. I'm just here. He goes, oh, good, because I'm giving a 3-day teaching in March, and I would love for you to be there. I was like, okay, I guess I'm here till March then.
Sounds like it.
And when you get a personal invite from the Dalai Lama to go to his teaching, yeah, you're going to stay there. And that's, he's a big fan of photography, and I knew that because of all of his autobiographies that he's written, and he loves astronomy as well. He got a telescope when he was like 6 years old.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so we had a lot of similar interests, photography and astronomy and stuff. And I said, is your birthday July 6th? And he goes, yes. I said, that's my birthday. We have the same birthday. We're half a century apart. And he thought that was fun. And he was just so, I don't even know how to describe his energy. But anyway, so I said to him, I said, you wrote the book, The Universe in a Single Atom, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, I love science. I'm a very scientific thinker. I do come from a sort of religious background, my dad and everything, although my dad believed in evolution, but he, and all this, I'm a very logical thinker. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I love science and astronomy and stuff. So I said, you wrote that book? And I just want to confirm it's not some
ghost written
fake publication. And he goes, yes, that's mine. I said, you said in that book that if science were to ever prove a form of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism would have to change. He said, that's right. I said, I had so much respect for you when I read that, because I can't think of any religious spiritual leader that it seems like a lot of people are afraid of science, right? And sorry, I don't mean to get all philosophical or anything, and he goes, well, science, Buddhism, same thing. Both are just in search for truth.
Yeah.
So one day they will become one. And anyway, it was so funny that you brought up that book, because that's what we talked about.
I always thought that book was interesting though, because it probably, similar to you, that it just seemed so unique, a unique perspective that I watched I had a front center row seat to a lecture by Neil deGrasse Tyson one time, and he talked about how really religion and science weren't compatible. And I thought it was interesting. Dalai Lama's, or his opinion on that was that it wasn't that the two were incompatible, but just, I just really liked that. It's probably one of the early things that there was a time in my life when I was really reading a lot about Buddhism and Eastern thought, and tried to really learn a lot about that, but really respected that religion too, for that same reason too, is that it wasn't something that they saw as threatening to them, the science.
Well, I've always thought that Buddhism was more of a study of psychology more than a religion. It's all about,
I've said that often,
just being as mindful as possible about what is here and now. What are you experiencing here and now in this present moment? That's pretty much what it's all about. Of course there's dogma involved, like any religion, people that are extremist types, but yeah, I think for me, it gave me a lot of peace and a lot of understanding, and I was on this really interesting spiritual journey, when I was there. So it planted quite a few interesting seeds. And then
I'm glad you told me about how you met him though, because I saw your picture on your site of you and the Dalai Lama, and I thought, man, how did that happen? I was very willing to hear this story.
It's really bizarre, and it's funny that I've met quite a few very influential people, and I'm always just like, why is this happening to me? Because I don't feel very deserving of that, and I just never feel like I'm at that level as far as, like, I don't know, success, or I don't know, but
I think it's a testament to, again, going back to that perseverance. It seems like from everything you've said that you're always working on something, and I don't know. I think that good things happen to people who are doing good things, and it sounds like you've done.
Thanks.
I mean, lots of amazing things. Like, I could sit here for another 2 hours and listen to these stories from you, and I feel like we could probably talk about them, because what we might need to do is just to line up another day to talk again, because there was things you were climbing Mount Everest at one point. Did you?
Oh no, that was my friend John that climbed.
Okay,
and he spread my dad's ashes for me, but he, oddly enough, became the person that was held hostage in Papua New Guinea that Obama's folks rescued out, which is the whole reason that the Batman photo exists, which is the whole reason that I ended up meeting Elton John, which is the whole reason all these other things happened, right? And so it's kind of like the domino effect. It's like that's what's caused a lot of my spiritual questioning, if you will, or my journey is like there have been so many coincidences happening to me ever since my dad passed away. So that it just makes me wonder. I don't know if you've seen the Interstellar.
Yeah, I have.
But, you know, Matthew McConaughey talking through the bookshelf, you know, and
I mean, it would be hard not to wonder that, because I mean, it seems from just, like I said, just the stories you've told me, it's just one coincidental event after another of things lining up perfectly.
And if you take out one tile,
the whole thing,
it all falls apart. But just to wrap it up, by the way, because I didn't mean to talk about the Dalai Lama, I was getting there just to talk about 108 and how 108 was like the theme of my whole India journey. Oh, and by the way, my original flight getting there got canceled, so I arrived there on January 8th instead of January 7th. So I got there on 108. I just started realizing all these things. So about, I don't know, 2 months before I was releasing the eclipse photo, I had been showing the photo to people in private as I was trying to make a plan of what I'm going to do to release this. And we were supposed to release it at the Hayden Planetarium at the Museum of Natural History, and they were going to have the print there on display for a year, which is going to be incredible. But anyway, there were a lot of legal things that I didn't agree to, and it's a whole long story because it was a historic museum and I'm still alive. So I wouldn't have been able to sell any of my work, or I wouldn't have been able to tell the story for like several years. And, you know, I need to survive. So anyway, it was a very interesting dynamic, though, the way that it was. But, you know, anyway, it all worked out because of Twitter. So, and Elon Musk canceling. But anyway, so during this, though, while I was working with the museum, NASA was going to send their heliophysicist, Alex Young, to present with me. And it was going to be this whole thing, and it was going to be televised. And so I started working with NASA. And so Alex Young invited me to the heliophysics lab in Maryland, the very first NASA office, and I met the very first NASA employee when I was there. It's so cool. And anyway, so they're taking me on this tour, and I think it was Alex. He was kind of talking about eclipses and how rare eclipses must be because, well, there's eclipses all over, right? Jupiter has like 60 moons or something.
Right.
There's eclipses all the time where the moon's shadow is getting cast onto Jupiter's surface. I can literally see it with my telescope. Saturn has all these moons too, but a perfect eclipse like we experience on Earth, the moon is obviously really tiny compared to the sun. Right? The sun is massive and the moon is really tiny, but because of the distance of the moon and the distance of the sun, the moon is the exact same size as the sun from our perspective on Earth. So when there's a total solar eclipse, it's not just that the moon or the sun is fully covered. It lines up perfectly. And that's why you can see all of these unbelievable phenomena, and you can actually see the surface of the sun with your naked eye. And NASA actually discovered a lot of really crazy things about the sun during eclipses. That's the only time that they can actually study the sun is during an eclipse. So NASA actually sent out multiple aircraft that were flying in front of each other. So the eclipse would cover this aircraft and they were capturing as much data as they could of the sun. And then it would cover up the next airplane. And these airplanes had these huge gimbals with these really, really expensive cameras to capture the data of the sun during an eclipse. And we found out during eclipses that the atmosphere of the sun is 1,000,000 degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. And scientists can't figure out why. And that's actually why they built the Parker Solar Probe, which is the spacecraft that is literally like going to the sun. So it's really interesting. Eclipses have dramatically changed what we know about the sun. And because of that, hopefully it might save our lives to learn how the sun works. Because if there's a big solar storm that faces Earth, like
Right.
all the satellites would go out. It would be really crazy. So anyway, I digress. But while he's telling me all this and how the moon just happens to be the same size as the sun from Earth, which who knows how rare that is in the whole universe. He said, well, it's all because of something called the 108 ratio and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we're like in a little group, right? A tour group. And I'm like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what is the 108 ratio? And he goes, well, if you take the moon's diameter and multiply it by 108, it's the same as the Earth's diameter. Oh, wait, no, sorry. The moon's diameter times 108 is the distance to the Earth. The sun's diameter times 108 is the distance to the Earth. The Earth's diameter times 108 is the same diameter as the sun. And it's because of all of these perfect ratios, which all happen to be multiples of 108, is why we have these perfect eclipses. And it was that moment right then and there. I'm like, all right, that's the name of the eclipse photo. After all this crazy 108 stuff. And I took the 108 photo right after I got back from India. So it was just a few months after the Dalai Lama's teaching. And so I was on this like anything is possible state of mind, you know, and which is probably a good reason. That's probably a reason why I was so determined. And anyway, so that's the much longer version of why it's called 108. I was a little hesitant to title it that just because I thought it would either I'd not get tired of people asking why it's 108, but not being able to answer that in a truly meaningful way quickly, without sounding too like kooky and spiritual.
Well, I know what you mean, but I'm happy that we've been here together and you've been able to tell me that story. I wondered that when I was looking at your website, and I feel honored to have been here to have heard the full story.
Yeah, and honestly, this is only the second time. Well, actually, this is the first time I've shared that story that would be published publicly. So there you go. So now when people ask me, I can be like, just listen to this podcast.
That's right. That's a good deal. I will publish this story for you online, and you can point people that direction instead of having to tell them the story again.
There you go. Yes, exactly. I would love to share the Carmichael Clan podcast with people. And by the way, our history is just so cool. I'm so glad that I read about my heritage and the Carmichael story. It's just really incredible. Even where our name came from, you know, Queen Margaret, I want to say,
had
started one of the first churches in Scotland on a hill called Carr Hill. Is that right? And wanted to name the church out of after the angel Michael.
Right.
And so the descendants from that became Carmichael. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's so crazy.
That's the way I understand
so cool.
it. Yeah, I know.
Like our name comes from the first church in Scotland. What?
Well, you know, when I was speaking with Andrew Carmichael, the younger of Carmichael.
Yeah, I met him. I spent a bit of time with him. Yeah.
He was on our show several episodes ago, and we were talking about the gathering. And it really hit me that how, you know, what a unique and special thing it is that we can still go to the literal source of our name. You know, you can go to the hill where the mausoleum is, you know, which is where our name came from 1,000 years ago. And I thought, you know, there's not many other people.
Cool.
You know, you have people whose names are after their job, the Fletchers, the Coopers, and so forth.
Right.
But we can go to the source of our name and sit there and, you know, and look at our chief. I think it's a really neat thing. I think our history is fascinating.
Yeah. It's so cool, isn't it? It made me very just proud.
Yeah.
Like, my name suddenly meant so much more to me. I was so spontaneous when I went to Scotland. I literally booked my flight like a few days before, and I contacted Andrew, and it was 10 years ago, so I can't really remember, but I feel like he was probably like, oh gosh, because I was like, I really want to stay there. And I was just like, I was so adamant about, you know, and he was not prepared to have a guest when I came out there, but he let me stay in one of the cottages. It was so nice of him. It was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, John, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I've really loved listening to you tell these stories. I feel like I haven't had to talk at all on this interview, which has been great. I've just enjoyed listening to your stories, and even thinking back to you starting about Elton John and these photographs. The strokes of luck and these coincidences that you've had are really unbelievable. But again, only work if you persevere through hardships and hard times. So I think
Mm.
it's really cool stories you've shared with me, and I'm really thankful.
Thank you, and thank you for saying that. And that's really interesting what you just said. I because it's the old saying, does luck exist or is luck earned? I always wonder that myself. But some of these things, I don't know. I feel like have nothing to do with me.
It's a mixture of both, but I
Yeah,
do
yeah.
appreciate it.
But well, thanks. I appreciate you saying that, and yeah, thanks again for having me on. It was great to meet a fellow Carmichael, and thank you.
Once again, thanks so much to Jon Carmichael for joining me on today's show and sharing this amazing story with us. Jon is an amazing individual with an inspiring story. We Carmichaels are fortunate to have so many talented people among us. Clan Carmichael Radio is growing steadily, and I'd love to keep reaching new listeners. To support the show, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and to share it with anyone else that you think might enjoy it. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or subscribe to the Clan Carmichael USA Substack page at clancarmichael.substack.com. By subscribing to the Substack page, each time I release a new episode or essay, you'll find it right in your inbox. So be sure to get signed up to receive all the latest from Clan Carmichael. And finally, if you like what we're doing, please leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple, or leave some feedback in the comments section on Substack. Your reviews help to promote the show and make it easier for others to find us, and it also lets me know that you are enjoying the shows. So until next time, toujours prêt. See you soon.